I don't think you're giving us our due credit. Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
5 years later.
The war against the machines.
The rise of the AI voice has been the go-to anxiety topic for the voiceover industry for the last couple of years. The one before this was arguably the acceptance of home studios, where more readily available and affordable technology, better remote connections, and also more online casting portals allowing people to go directly to their clients had meant that there was a greater acceptance of that as a valid way of doing voiceover work. So before we get into the whole AI thing, it's really important that we set out what exactly that we're talking about, and specifically that there's a distinction between the two main types of AI voice that are out there. There's text-to-speech and there's also speech-to-speech. Text-to-speech is what we most readily accept AI voices to be, so that you're literally inputting text and as a result a synthetic voice is turning that into spoken speech. But there's also speech-to-speech, where there is actually a live performance that is giving the vocal inflections, but then a digital mask of another voice is being placed over the top of it. And we also need to remember that, like most developing technologies, AI voice stands on a moral spectrum. There are better examples of it and worse examples of it. On the one side, some of this technology is literally giving voice to the voiceless, as demonstrated by Vocal ID's work in the area. And then on the opposite side, you have the model that we as voice actors might be more familiar with, which is something like a product like Speechello, which advertises itself overtly as a solution to those really expensive and costly and unnecessary voice actors. So I'd say the key questions about AI voices are: how good are they? Will they replace voice actors? What voiceover genres will it affect? And how can voice actors best prepare for it? Now, every few months, there seems to be another development in the mainstream media which provokes another spasm of anxiety for voiceover actors. 18 months ago, it was probably the release of a trailer of a AI voice that could cry called Faith by the developer Sonantic. Most recently, there was a controversy sparked by Troy Baker, the voice actor. Now, Baker is essentially as close to voice actor royalty as you can get. He's starred in a whole variety of different franchises, some of the biggest franchises in video games, and it's been a running joke within the industry that he's in pretty much every game. He tweeted about partnering with an AI voice company to allow everyone the chance to own and invest in the IPs that they create. Now, part of the controversy was that it was a combination of AI voice and also NFTs, which is a whole other subject unto itself that I don't really want to focus on in this video. But what I do want to focus on in this video is that it shows that many voice actors out there already are exploring the different options of monetizing an AI version of their voice. When discussing his thinking and also the subsequent backlash on the podcast Play, Watch, Listen, Baker explained a bit more thoroughly about what his rationale was.
You never fire like the middle management. You fire the most expensive. That's where the change happens. Producers, by and large, are looking for is like, how can we get away from hiring someone like Troy Baker, who's really expensive, versus that guy doesn't cost that much. He's a negligible amount, or she's not going to be as expensive. So what I'm saying is if they're trying to bring anybody's cost down, it's not that person, it's me. My job is to not be better than anything. My job is to be the solution to the problem.
Now, I'd really recommend that podcast, and I would also say that Alana Pierce, the video game writer, and Mike Bithell, the video game developer, made very good counterpoints in terms of obviously the very explicit risk that AI voices might have, especially for new voiceover talents coming into the industry who aren't as established as Baker. But what possibly interested me most about Baker's explanations towards his thinking was that it wasn't just about being as good as he could possibly be as an actor, but it was also about his focus about addressing the pain points of the clients that are out there as well. And that obviously rings true to a lot of the marketing that I do, where the marketing that I recommend, where it's not all about you and what you can do, but it's addressing the markets and your potential clients' pain points first and foremost.
But I'm meeting about this literally last week with a studio who was like, we don't want to use the robo voice, but it's not a good use of our time to have people in-house record all the dialogue. What are our options? So I get that, and I also understand like smaller voice actors' concerns with it too. I imagine that similar for the composing community, like I would guess people are split on it. Some people like it and some people don't.
So, given all of this, what should voice actors do? Should we just give up? Should we pretend it isn't existing or happening at all, just live entirely in denial? Or maybe we should just sell out as soon as possible? Well, we still can't be sure what exact genres of voiceover are going to be most affected, but we can take an educated guess. IVR, phone messaging, and some e-learning are probably going to be the most obvious candidates, because if an AI program can change the language of an entire course rapidly, then that can obviously have some added value. There's also an argument for some commercial content to be very specifically catered towards AI programs. Maybe you receive an advert which addresses you by name, addresses the location where you are, and also addresses what it is that you're playing or watching. That hyper-personalized commercial experience, which some marketers are definitely going to want to engage with, is only really going to be feasible using an AI voice, rather than having a human talent recording potentially millions of different variations. In games, AI voices are being used as a placeholder and in the development process, and there are actual AI voice programs which are being built into and trialed in platforms such as Unity, which is specifically to aid the game development process, because it makes more financial sense sometimes as a placeholder than it would be to hire live talent for work-in-progress work. Also, a wide availability of decent AI voices, generally speaking, would obviously invite greater use of voices in indie games, whereas before they would simply be priced out entirely. And we can see how some of the online casting sites are already catering to this, where you have Voice123 and Voices.com trialing AI voices, and freelancing websites such as Fiverr looking at teaming up with AI providers such as Lovo, so that people can first of all order samples of existing human voiceovers, but then that leading probably almost essentially to them also having an AI voice offering as well. There is also the wider question of diversity that needs to certainly be borne in mind, which is that if a whole area is suddenly flooded by AI voice versions of reputable video game voice actors that people are going to be using instead of early voice actors, then it means that there's going to be a narrower pool of actual talent there as a result, and some of the newer and more diverse talent that is coming into voice acting might be stifled in their development. But still, and I'm sorry, this is a cop-out, it is still too soon to know for sure exactly how this will impact. All we know that there is a greater tolerance. Now that we're using Alexa, we're using Siri, we're using TTS in the social media that we imbibe every day, there is a greater tolerance. It is going to be part of our lives in some form to come. That's as much as we know, and we can't ignore it. So, what can we as voice actors do? Well, I suggest 5 things. The first thing I'd recommend is that we focus on being voice actors, and this may seem obvious, but it still bears repeating. The one thing that AI voices really struggle with is spontaneous, realistic emotion, and even if you do teach an AI voice to cry with specific inputs, then if you give them those same specific inputs, they will cry in exactly the same way. There's not going to be that level of spontaneity, whereas an actor who lives in the moment has a seemingly limitless way of being able to channel those kind of things. Also, you need to value yourself artistically as a collaborator as well as just a gun for hire. So the fact that as a voice actor that you can understand the rules of copy and how to interpret text and give feedback on that, or similarly with character relationships, the background of characters and the decision-making process behind that is all added value that you can readily market and sell to potential collaborators, which AI voices simply won't have. My second point would be to be as educated as possible about the subject. So I would say podcasts like the VO Social podcast about AI voices is great. Angan Guza's VO Boss podcasts, she's created a whole series of interviews with different AI voice providers about their approaches, their ethical standpoint, all of that kind of thing. I would say Hugh Edwards at Gravy for the Brain has worked a lot with TTS stuff as well and spoken to a number of developers. And I'd say podcasts podcasts like Play, Watch, Listen, where you're actually seeing game developers, game writers, composers, and voice actors all discussing this kind of thing, so that it's not isolated but as part of a whole conversation in itself, are really invaluable. The third thing to do is be open to potential opportunities where AI voice could actually augment your own workflow. Yes, you could have an AI avatar that actually you market yourself, or have someone market for you for a lower stream of paid work, but there's also the potential to maybe use AI voice to just do pickups in your workflow, so that an algorithm can auto-replace those 12 errors for you instead of you having to go back in and do those pickups. Again, it's just kind of being open to all of the different offerings that are out there, so that you can then see what might serve you best. Do you want an AI avatar? Do you want it to be on a separate platform? Do you want someone to market for you? Again, by familiarizing yourself with what other people are offering, you can start making some informed decisions. The fourth point, going hand in hand with that, is to value your voice usage rights. And I'll always be banging on about knowing what usage is as a voice actor anyway, but it's essentially making sure that you steer clear of anything which asks for a potential complete buyout. A lot of voice actors will have seen a text-to-speech programs where you'll have to record anything from half an hour to 3 hours to 10 hours of seemingly nonsensical sentences from which they'll create a text-to-speech program, and then they'll offer a complete buyout fee of anywhere from between $2,500 to $3,000 up to $10,000 to $20,000 pounds or dollars. And all of this kind of stuff is really, really, really iffy, because they're essentially offering a buyout on that, and therefore you don't have any say on where that voice may end up. And obviously we've got a recent example of Bev Standing, a voice actor whose voice was used on TikTok without her permission. Those usage rights are really going to be crucial, because if you sign them away too early and very, very, very cheaply, that's going to be the slippery slope. And finally, the fifth thing is really to return to a theme of mine, which is the crucial aspect of forging direct relationships with your clients rather than being beholden to freelancing sites or pay-to-plays or anything else like this. Your value proposition as a voice actor is going to be more and more this human connection and all of the additional benefits that you can add, and if there are other things that can get in the way of that, then that's going to diminish your ability to maintain a career in this area. The sooner that you're independent and very clear about what value that you're adding to every single project that you lend yourself with, the more that you're going to make yourself independent and more self-sustaining as a business. To conclude, I'd encourage us to look back at what I was talking about with the advent of home studios beforehand. Those talents that really thrived were those people who weren't afraid of new technology, who were appreciative of the fact that their customers' workflows were changing, and therefore their skill sets needed to change in order to cater to those new needs. They embraced new technology and saw that how that could be able to enhance their client offering. It's something that we need to be aware of, and something that we need to bear in mind of in a customer-centric way as much as possible. I don't believe that AI voices are going to spell the end of voice actors and their careers, especially when we live in a world where the emotional connection and authenticity is a key factor in everything that we do, whether that's particularly artistic projects or voice acting, whether it's e-learning, whether or not it's commercial or narration. All of these things, the emotional connection is always going to be absolutely key. But still, we have to be aware of what is developing around us. I hope you found this video of some interest, and if you have, please do like, subscribe, and spread the word, and I look forward to seeing you next time.